So welcome back to my channel. My name is Melissa Siegel and I'm a professor of migration studies. So in a previous video we talked about who a migrant is, and now I'm going to talk about different types of migrants. So just a quick recap, who is a migrant? A migrant is any person who is moving or has moved across an international border or within a state away from his or her habitual residence, regardless of the person's legal status, whether the movement was voluntary or involuntary, what the causes of the movement are, and the length of stay. So perhaps one of the first differentiations that we see is a difference between an internal migrant and an international migrant. So again, according to the IOM, the International Organization for Migration, an internal migration is a movement of people from one area of a country to another for the purpose or with the effect of establishing a new residence. And this migration may be temporary or permanent. And internal migrants move but remain within their country of origin. A lot of the types of internal migrants that we see are actually from rural areas to urban areas. Now, the difference with international migration is that international migration is a move across a country border. So this is the movement of a person who leaves their country of origin or their country of habitual residence to establish themselves in either permanently or temporarily in another country. So therefore, some kind of international border is crossed. Some other definitions that often get misunderstood or, let's say, confused are the difference between emigrants or emigration and immigrants or immigration. So emigration with an E is when someone leaves their country and moves to another country. On the flip side, an immigrant is a person who enters a new country. So every migrant is both an emigrant leaving their country and an immigrant arriving in their new country. So let's just use myself as an example. I'm an emigrant from the United States and an immigrant in the Netherlands. So moving on, there are many different types of migrants, many different categorizations of migrants, and many of the ones that I'm going to talk to you right now about are the ones that are most often used. That does not mean by any sense that this is an all-encompassing vlog on all the different possible types of migrants, but those that are the most common. First, one of the main distinctions that we see are the difference between voluntary and involuntary migrants, and this can also be quite blurry. So the definition of a voluntary migrant is a person who is moved as a result of their own desires and motivations. Alternatively, an involuntary migrant is a person who is migrated because they have been displaced from their home country, have a fear of persecution, or have been moved by deception or coercion. And in some cases, this could also be being moved by environmental factors. There is also the difference between, for instance, a refugee and an asylum seeker. This is another definition that is often quite misunderstood. So let's start with an asylum seeker. An asylum seeker is a person who has requested for sanctuary in another country but has not yet been processed. So basically, they have not yet been given the decision as to whether or not they will be an official refugee or not. Now, a refugee has a different definition. A refugee is a person who has fled war, violence, conflict, or persecution and has crossed an international border to find safety in another country. Now, the definition of refugee internationally is defined in the UN Refugee Convention from 1951. And here the definition is someone who is unable or unwilling to return to their country of origin owing to a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion. Now that is the most encompassing kind of international definition. However, many countries themselves have decided to perhaps expand the definition of who they consider a refugee. So countries can expand the definition, but officially they're not able to limit the definition if they've subscribed to the 1951 Geneva Convention. Now there's some other dichotomies that we also see. One is the difference between regular and irregular migration. I know that sometimes people like to refer to this as legal or illegal migration. In general, we as migration scholars don't like to use the term. We prefer to stick with regular or irregular migrants. So a regular migrant is someone who migrates through recognized legal channels, whereas an irregular migrant is someone who, owing to illegal entry or the expiry of his or her visa, lacks the legal status in transit or host country. This term applies to migrants who infringe on a country's administrative rules and any other person not authorized to remain in the host country. So sometimes this can be referred to as a person who is clandestine, illegal, or undocumented, or in an irregular situation. Now previously I also talked about temporary or permanent migrants in some of the previous definitions. Now who we consider temporary and who we consider permanent can actually get quite gray and quite tricky. One way is how countries define temporary or permanent residence, and this often comes with their residency status or residency visa, for instance. So people can have a permanent residency visa, which generally gives them the right to stay in a country unlimited, and this is usually granted to people after 5 years and many other things that they have to qualify for. A temporary residence permit is usually given for a limited duration of time. So this might be 1 year, 2 years, or more, but it's usually always for a limited duration of time. Now the UN has a different definition for how it sees temporary versus permanent migration. The reason for this is really just because of what is easier to measure. So as far as UNDESA or the UN is concerned, a permanent migrant is anyone who has resided in another country for at least 1 year and is documented in that country. Anyone who is residing in that country for under 1 year is considered a temporary migrant. Now, if we consider how migrants see themselves, this is a completely different story. If someone considers themselves a temporary migrant or a permanent migrant, really has to do with their intentions for the future. So in some cases, you might see people who have been in a country for 20 years but still plan to retire and go back to their original country of origin. In this case, the migrant themselves might still consider themselves as temporary because they plan at some point to return to their country of origin. However, many other definitions, and probably the country where they're residing, would consider them a permanent migrant. And of course, people's ideas about whether or not they're temporary or permanent can also change over time. So these are just a few of the dichotomies or the different types of migrants that we see. A final one that I want to cover is highly skilled versus low skilled migrants. Here again, and of course there's a middle skilled group that is just a bit less talked about. But when we're talking about how migrants are categorized, they're often categorized as highly skilled migrants or low skilled migrants. And that's because it's usually highly skilled migrants or low skilled migrants that are those that are most often migrating and where we have the most labor market needs. So with highly skilled migrants, every country can identify or define who they consider a highly skilled migrant differently. So some countries may define their immigrants as highly skilled if they're able to get a certain number of points in a point system. These point systems are usually made up of educational requirements, of requirements on the labor market or what kinds of jobs this person has held before, or different kinds of qualifications. It could also come with a certain number of years of experience. So these are different ways that we often see countries defining who is highly skilled. In some countries, like the Netherlands, for instance, a person is defined as highly skilled based on how much money they make, actually. So this is specifically for immigrants. So if an immigrant is being paid over a certain threshold, they already qualify as a highly skilled migrant. And there are different reasons why countries may define highly skilled migrants in different ways. When looking at UN definitions, anyone who has tertiary level education is considered a highly skilled migrant. So you can see that's kind of a lower threshold than what many countries may consider a highly skilled migrant who is entering their country, or how someone can qualify for a highly skilled visa. So these are again just some of the dichotomies that we see within migration and how people are seen in different categories. If you have other questions on different categorizations of migrants, or have some comments on what I've just said right now, please make sure to give me some comments in the comment box below. And if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to it.